Hello, this is Storm Warden coming back at you today with another video update. And today we're going to talk about the tropics. We're going to talk about the potential for another Gulf system to form, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the potential for a pretty significant flooding threat that could take place in Florida, particularly southern Florida, and maybe in Helene impacted areas as well. So we'll talk all about that as we get into today's video. If you've been liking my weather content, please subscribe as I will bring you daily weather updates. And yeah, but without further ado, we're gonna get right into it, guys. So here we have a 40% chance of cyclone formation in the next 7 days here in the Gulf of Mexico. We also have two areas out here in the Atlantic. We have Hurricane Kirk out here, which is probably a Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricane out here, but thankfully this will stay well away from the U.S. and this shouldn't bring any issues to us, as well as Leslie. Leslie is also a tropical storm as we speak. This will probably become a major hurricane, but there is some model variation in the model guidance as to whether this will become a hurricane or not. But generally speaking, because we have so much troughing over the continental U.S. right now, I don't expect either of these to really pose any threat. Now, Leslie, some models have it getting fairly close to the islands, but again, with so much troughing over the east, over the continental U.S., I don't really expect these to get so far west. But again, something to certainly watch. We have to watch trends in the troughing, and of course, we have to watch this ridge over the waters and watch how strong that may be to push this far enough west. But generally speaking, the general theme has been that these systems will recurve away from the U.S. So that's certainly good news. But we do have a threat for a storm to maybe hit somewhere in the U.S. from the Gulf. Now, granted, this has come back up from the last time I talked to you guys. I'm still very skeptical about this just because there's so much wind shear and there's going to be a pretty nice dose of dry air in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm pretty skeptical on whether this will develop or not, but generally speaking, the models have definitely come into more consistency that this will bring a pretty significant flooding threat to southern Florida. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start by looking at the EPS ensemble members for this system because something interesting has happened over the last day or so. What we're seeing is this is the Eastern Pacific, right? Well, we have an area of organized thunderstorms, and that's known as 11E over here in the Pacific. So that's known as 11E. What's been happening in models is that they have a crossover, and basically what a crossover is that we had this Eastern Pacific storm pushing over the Eastern Pacific, and then coming back over the Bay of Campeche, and then pushing into the Gulf of Mexico. So that's very interesting model runs. Some of the model runs have this crossing over and then getting into the Gulf of Mexico where it forms a tropical storm. Some models even take it to hurricane strength. Granted, guys, I'm very, very skeptical, but models do show that. So I'm going to take you through the EPS ensembles. I'm going to take you through the GEFS ensembles, and then we're going to talk about the steering currents, and we're going to talk about all the limiting factors through the model guidance. So starting off here at EPS ensembles, and I want you to watch this area over here. And as you go through time, you're gonna notice a little bit of brightening in the ensemble members, and notice that. Look, you got a pretty nice or pretty big area of some models showing a storm developing. You got a few hurricane members in there. Generally speaking, they all head towards southern Florida. So generally speaking, there's not much discrepancy in where this goes because we know for a fact that we have troughing located over the east. So we know that this system is probably going to move east wherever it goes. But we don't know the intensity because one, you have this trough which is going to provide wind shear and it's going to provide dry air. So there's a lot of question to how strong or how intense this system may get. Um, the slower members seemingly are much more stronger than the members that are much quicker and faster. So generally speaking, it could be a situation where we have a slower system. It could be stronger because it has more time over water, and a further south system could mean it's further away from the wind shear and the dry air, which could mean a stronger system. So, generally speaking, looking at the overall guidance, I'm thinking that if we have a slower, more south system, we're probably looking at a stronger system, maybe toward more of that hurricane strength. But if we have a further north system, it may just be too frontal. It may just be too much wind shear and dry air that we don't have a system at all, and it just brings a pretty big area of heavier rain to the west coast of Florida and central Florida. So there's definitely some possibilities out there. There's definitely some crazy model runs out there that I refuse to show you guys because I don't do that, and I will only show you the ensemble members because they are the most informative right now, and they're the best tool to use when we're still at a pretty still decent amount of time out, but it is interesting how models have that crossover happening. And the Euro was the first model to really latch onto this. So it is also interesting to me that the European model or European ensemble members are a lot more aggressive, than say the GFS ensemble. So, it's very interesting, but it looks to be that we have a slower, more southern system. We're definitely looking at a more stronger system. But if we see a more faster, more northerly system, then we're probably looking at a much weaker system. Generally speaking, guys, though, I don't really expect this still to be a significant storm, but it is interesting that some models get this hurricane strength. And if that happens and it goes over Helene impacted areas, that's definitely not a good situation for southern Florida. So those are the EPS ensembles. Now I'm going to take you to the GEF ensembles, which are a little bit more anemic and weak, but again, um, model guidance is model guidance. We're going to take you through this. And again, some of the GEF ensembles are a little bit more intense, but generally speaking, there looks to be a little bit less members than the EPS ensembles. And generally speaking, you got a couple members that go further north and are a little bit stronger. But generally speaking, those are also the slower solutions compared to some of these that are already over here by this point in time, compared to the members that are still back in the central Gulf Coast. So again, it looks to be that if you have a slower solution and more southern solution, you're probably looking at a stronger storm. But even if you just have a slower solution in general, whether it's north or south, it looks to be that we could have a stronger system. Looking at GEFS ensemble, so generally speaking, very interesting model runs. Though I'm very very skeptical of this system just because I feel like there's plenty of limiting factors this time around compared to Helene. I just thought there's a little bit more limiting factor, especially since you got this big old trough that will be located over the east, which should bring us very nice fall like weather early next week. So very interesting model runs from the GEFS ensembles and EPS ensembles, but generally speaking, definitely something to watch because while there are limiting factors, there's still very warm waters over the Gulf. They're not nuclear like they were for Helene, but there's still warm SSTs, and you still got this trough interaction that should happen, which should provide a pretty favorable chance for some flooding over southern Florida. So again, there's a couple things going for this system, especially if we can get organized quicker, and it can be further away from the wind shear and dry air. But generally speaking, equal equal chances. I think a 40% chance is a good call for the National Hurricane Center. There's still a lot of questions as to what's going to happen because these EPAC crossovers, which is what we call them, EPAC, which is East Pacific crossover, that crossover into the Gulf, they don't happen very frequently at all. But they can happen, and they have happened in the past. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I do know they have happened before. But generally speaking, if we can get something to form in the Western Gulf, that's certainly a more favorable area than say areas maybe further north and maybe further east into the Gulf where there's that wind shear and gyre that will take over due to that trough. So, I talked about limiting factors and I talked about wind shear. Now, here I want to show you. Now you can watch this L that comes off the East Pacific, and notice how this is an area that develops into a system. Now you see it going through, and look, and the GFS model keeps it very very disorganized. And look at all that wind shear to the north in the Gulf. That's a lot of wind shear from our trough that will come in. So again, there's plenty of limiting factors, guys, and that's a pretty big area of wind shear. And you can kind of see how our trough comes in and it digs even more and it pushes this system to the east off the coast. So, if you're wondering the Carolinas will this be a threat to us, highly unlikely due to that trough. This should easily keep this system maybe crossing over Florida and then going straight east because this trough should help push it out. But that's a lot of wind shear, folks, in the Gulf. That's not a favorable environment for organization. But look to your south though. If you can get this system to be further south and slower, then we could probably get a stronger system. But what you want is the system to be quicker and just overall weaker. But regardless, this is still going to be a heavy rain threat to Florida because you have all this moisture that's going to push east, and then you have this trough interaction to your north, and you're in a favorable jet entrance, which is just to your north, which should allow for a pretty decent flooding threat in Florida. It's particularly southern Florida at that. So, again, lots of questions still. But generally speaking, regardless of whether this gets a name or not, this is just one of those situations where I do think you're going to see flooding regardless in Florida, just because you have so much moisture and you're in a favorable position for flash flooding. So even if this doesn't get a name, still expect impacts in Florida as far as heavier rain and potential flooding. But that's one of the limiting factors. You see all that wind shear in the Gulf. That should certainly keep things down a little bit. But again, still some questions. And then here's that dry air punch that I talked about. And because that trough is digging in, that dry air punch is going to be quite significant, which should bring in some dry air to the Gulf. So even if we do get a system, it may be very asymmetric and it may be very lopsided due to that dry air on the western side, as well as that northern that shear on the northern side. This should keep things very lopsided, probably a very east-weighted storm, kind of like some of the other storms we've seen this year. So generally speaking, guys, there's definitely some limiting factors with this system. Now, I talked about the rainfall potential. Now, here's the Euro model for rainfall potential, and you see there's some areas of 7, 8, 9 inches of rainfall right around Cape Coral or West Palm Beach, Port St. Lucie, Florida, Sartosta. Hopefully I said that right, Sartosta. The So definitely some areas of heavier rainfall in these areas. Definitely flooding and potential with this. Even down in Miami, you have some flooding potential. So, regardless of whether this gets named or not, guys, there should certainly still be a flooding threat in the Florida area. Here's the GFS model. I cannot talk. Please forgive me. And this shows a pretty decent flooding threat in Tampa, Sartosa. I really hope I'm saying that right. I feel like I'm not. Cape Coral, Point St. Lucie, Palm Bay, West Palm Beach, and Miami. All these areas could be under flooding threat. The GFS is a little bit further north compared to the Euro model. Again, give or take a few miles, and you could be looking at a flooding threat in Tampa as well, which wouldn't be good news because you were just hit by Helene not too long ago. And these are totals on the higher end. GFS has almost 12 inches of rainfall. This will be a significant flooding threat for southern Florida. This is not what we want to see. We don't want to see two flooding disasters, with one already ongoing in North Carolina and then one in Florida. We don't need this, but flash flooding is certainly a threat in these areas. I expect the WPC Weather Prediction Center to put out a flooding risk for these areas at some point. I don't know when, but it'll probably be soon. And here's the Weather Prediction Center's forecast, and they're already hot. They're a little bit on the northern end too, and they're already highlighting 4 to 7 inches. Cape Coral at 7. They're already highlighting that 4 to 7 inch range of rainfall for Florida. So that's certainly impactful. Could bring some flooding to these regions. So if you're in Florida, particularly from I want to say Tampa, Palm Bay southward, you could certainly be looking at a pretty decent flash flooding risk for your areas, and maybe even significant flooding. And if you get a system, that's going to add is storm surge and a tornado threat. So again, overall speaking, going back to earlier in the video, again, 40% chance of formation. Whether this forms or not, you could still be looking at a flash flooding threat. And we're going to go back to the rainfall. Here's a forecast for that. I wouldn't be surprised these numbers go up. But generally speaking, even if we don't get a system out of this, it's still going to be significant flash flooding in Florida. So if you're in Florida, watch out. Keep watching the weather. Stay updated because there could be a flooding threat in your area coming up soon. And if you get a system form that comes out of the East Pacific, then we could be looking at an added storm surge threat as well as a tornado threat. So that's all I got today for you guys. But that 40% chance of cyclone formation, it may come down a bit. I'm very skeptical of this system developing just due to that wind shear and dry air. But again, anything's possible in the Gulf of Mexico. You still got warm SSTs. And you still got some things going for it. So that's all I got, guys. I'll be back at you guys another video update tomorrow.